Have a need for a special meeting this evening. I'm going to call this meeting to order. Would you please stand with us for the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Council, would you sign in, please? Ms. Hawley?
All councilors present with councilors Daniel, Coleman, and Grego previously requesting to be excused.
Thank you. Citizen comment. Alamosa welcomes your comments. Citizens wishing to speak may obtain a complete speaker card.
I'm sorry, Mayor, did we want to do agenda approval?
Oh, I'm sorry. Yes.
I move that
I got carried away here. Agenda approval. Are there any additions or deletions to the agenda?
No, sir.
Thank you, Heather. Then we'll move on to citizen comment.
No, we got to approve the agenda. I move that we approve the agenda as presented, excusing Mr. Grego, Ms. Daniel, and Mr. Coleman from the meeting.
I second.
Got a motion and a second. Thank you. Start voting, please. Ms. Hawley?
The motion carried unanimously.
Move on to citizen comment. Does it look, anyone want to make a comment? We'll then move on to our executive session. I'll entertain them.
Before we get to the executive session, Mayor, we need to have council consider first reading of ordinance number 21-2017, which is the parameters ordinance for the ice rink multi-purpose facility funding.
And just to clarify, it looks like this executive session got placed 2 times on the agenda, so we're obviously just not going to do the first one. We'll conduct this regular business and then request that council go into executive session. Sorry for that confusion on the agenda.
Okay, thank you.
I didn't even see that.
So, regular business? Eric?
Thank you, Mayor. What we're looking at this evening is a parameters ordinance for funding of the ice rink multi-purpose facility. The reason we wanted to bring this before you on a special meeting was so that we can get this done on 2 readings as quickly as we can, because as the clock ticks, we don't know what the rates that we might be subject to are. The bid that the city put out had bids come back that were all of limited duration, and the one that we accepted fluctuates with the LIBOR rate. I don't know whether Judy's had a more recent update, but I believe the last time that we talked to the bank, they didn't expect that LIBOR rate to move much in the next month or so. But we are concerned that we want to get this done quickly, so that's why it's in front of you tonight. And what the parameters ordinance does is exactly what the last parameters ordinance that you recently approved, for funding did, and that is to set the outside limits of what the funding can be in terms of total amount borrowed, total amount to be repaid, and total amount of annual payments. So total amount to be repaid, of course, would include both principal and interest. And this ordinance sets those numbers in section 3 on page 3, approving the amount of $3.36 million, that's total principal and interest, based on a $175,000 maximum annual payment. The way that we came up with the $3.36 million was to take the $2.4 million that we had released in the request for proposal and run that at, to be safe, 3.57%. You may recall that the bid was 3.07%. I use the term bid loosely. The proposal was 3.07%. We factored in this parameters ordinance, the top limit being 3.57 to accommodate any change in the LIBOR rate. We also factored a principal of 2.4 million rather than the, I don't know if anybody has the number on the top of their head, 2.2 something million, 2.258 million, which is what we intend to spend on the facility. There will additionally be some costs of issuance, the payment to bond counsel and bank counsel for their fees. So that will more than cover the amount of issuance. We shouldn't have to issue the full 2.4, but something more than the 2.258.
Thank you, Eric. Council, do we have any questions of Eric at this point? Go ahead, Councilor Vihel.
In the communication, it says a maximum annual service payment of $175,000. What does that mean?
That means that so the way the bond schedule is set up, if you actually look in the materials, is for payment twice a year. And so between those two payments of principal and interest, the total payment in any given year, any calendar year, will be no more than $175,000.
Thank you. Any other questions?
I have one.
Councilor Stefano?
On the amount of the construction, the 2.25 million, this doesn't include any of the grants that we've gotten for this project or anything like that? Is this still above the grants?
So yes, this does not include, the total project cost is closer to 2.8, but we only need to finance 2.258, which is the remaining amount after the grants.
Thank you.
And the reason for the two financial schedules,
The 3.07% financial schedule is the schedule that was in the bank's proposal and that we are hoping we can get it at. The 3.57 schedule is a worst-case scenario if the LIBOR rate moves between now and September 8th, or even 10 days prior to September 8th. We have set September 8th as the closing date. That will enable us to get this ordinance put in place. And additionally, we have to replat the existing lot that's out by the rec center, because
Okay.
this facility will overlap that lot, and we don't want to be having the rec center tied up in the funding for the multipurpose facility. So we need to separate those two lots. And in order to get that on Planning Commission's calendar and in front of you, we're looking at September 8th for a closing date.
And I think another driver was the waiting period following the second reading of the ordinance as well, in case there was any challenges. It's important to note, even at the worst case of 3.57% interest, that's still lower than the next lowest proposal when we did the competitive process. And so we are keeping an eye on that as well.
Heather, in your conversations with the lending institution, what kind of vibrations are you getting as far as the interest rate goes?
I think Judy would probably be the best one to answer that. Judy,
Okay.
if you want to step up to the microphone. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Judy.
In my last conversation with Sherry at the bank, she said they weren't looking for an increase probably until sometime in the next quarter. And I would say they do that later in September rather than earlier in September. She said it's usually something they don't change every day, so.
So we're basically leaning within that scheduled
Yes.
interest rate, hopefully on the lower end?
Yes. Well, because when we first started negotiations with them, she said probably they didn't look for it to change for at least 60 days, and that was early in July. So I think we're probably
Thank you,
hopefully
Judy.
good.
Councilor Hensley?
So I probably didn't understand it, so I'm going to ask the question, but it probably was written in the ordinance. So just for clarification on that 175,000, where it has to fall within those parameters. Is that something, not saying we'd ever want to, but if we wanted to pay more, we can't?
The ordinance has nothing to do with how much we can pay.
Okay.
So the ordinance just says
No
that's
wonder I didn't find
the
it.
most that that we could ever be required to pay.
Okay.
But there is there was, let me put it that way, there was in the bank's proposal a prepayment penalty.
Okay.
So it's unlikely that we would want to prepay.
That was my question. Thank you.
Okay. And that $175,000 a year is within the parameters of the interest rate, obviously.
It's the upper end.
Upper end.
Hopefully, if we can get at the 3.07, we will be less than that.
Thank you, Heather. Any other questions? Councilor Stefano.
I move that we approve ordinance 21-2017 on first reading and set it for public hearing on August 2nd, 2017.
Second.
I've got a motion and a second. Is there any further discussion on ordinance number 20-2017? Seeing none, start voting, please. Ms. Hawley?
The motion carried unanimously.
Thank you. We will now move into executive session. I will entertain a motion.
I move that we move into executive session pursuant to CRS 24-6-4024EL to determine positions with respect to acquisition of additional sustainability groundwater rights.
I'll second.
I've got a motion and a second. Is there any further discussion? Start voting, please. Ms. Hawley?
The motion carried unanimously.
Thank you. So with that, we will move into executive session. Give us a few minutes. We'll move it, or you want to just do it here, or we can do it here? Thank you. Counselor?